It's time for us to own our power and do things differently. We got to throw out the old rule books. They're not working. The old playbook sucks.
Welcome to Natural Collisions, brought to you by COAC Detroit. Conversations about the challenges and opportunities in the nonprofit sector, highlighting the voices in nonprofit work in Detroit and Southeast Michigan, and beyond. I'm your host, Charnay Sanders, Program Manager at COAC Detroit. Today's conversation is a bit different. Instead of one conversation, we are bringing you highlights from a collective of conversations that took place during the 2022 Detroit Capacity Building Forum, How We Invest, which includes discussions on shifting funder and nonprofit power dynamics, recommendations for funders, and lightning talks with nonprofit thought leaders. Over the past few years, the Detroit Capacity Building Forum has been a collaboration between Michigan Community Resources and COAC Detroit. This forum provides a space for nonprofit professionals, consultants, funders, community organizers, social justice advocates, community residents, and others across the ecosystem to connect around pressing challenges facing our communities. Challenges so complex that they require cross-sector solutions where all of us can collectively work together to open the way for transformative possibilities in Detroit and Southeast Michigan. The theme for the 2022 Detroit Capacity Building Forum was How We Invest, which focused on shifting the conversation from centering funders and those with financial power to focusing on the roles everyone in our ecosystem can play to invest differently in people, organizations, and ideas. A collection of links can be found in the description below from the Detroit Capacity Building Forum, including speaker bios and a helpful resource list. So let's jump right in. We start our forum highlights with the conversation. From the 12 recommendations for funders to today, where are we now? With guests Kevin Ryan of the Ford Foundation and Mark Greer from the Transforming Power Fund. I'll let Orlando take it from here.
I want to start with where we are today with respect to the 12 recommendations for Detroit funders that Allied Media and the Detroit People's Platform published back in 2015. This document was published. Just to riff off some of the recommendations: develop mechanisms for an authentic representation and participation from stakeholder communities in setting funding criteria and priorities. Commit to understanding the full dimensions and actively work to dismantle structural racism and economic inequality in Metro Detroit. Create pathways for small grassroots organizations to access funds. Develop more nuanced ways of measuring success. Oh yeah. Prepare organizations to create deep transformative change. That's just a few of the recommendations that these groups published in 2015. With respect to those 12 recommendations and where we are now, I want to hear from both of you. How you feel we doing? How are we doing? Where are we? Kevin, we'll start with you.
Where are we? We're not doing very well when you look at the recommendations. I also want to just give a shout out also to Allied Media and Detroit People's Platform, because they put out a great report called Changing the Conversation that was focused on the gap in funding for community organizing. Because if we're really going to talk about change work and funding change work, community organizing, power building that puts the power in the hands of community, we've got to talk about that too. And I urge everybody to read. If you haven't read that report, that is a really great report, because in that report they offer also examples of where philanthropy has funded equitable work and where it has failed in funding equitable work. But I wanted to be fair also. I was not here when that report came out. the changing conversation report with the blueprint for forward building our strategy here. And we also have to look at, there was a racial reckoning in 2020 where we saw around the country different, whether it's coalitions of foundations, step forward with important change strategies related to racial justice, etc. We did not see that here in Detroit. We saw people make individual commitments to addressing this, but we did not see a collective approach to addressing these issues. Now, on the one hand, I will say there are more participatory funding vehicles. In the intro, Detroit Resident First Fund was mentioned. Transforming Power Fund is here. There are more of these vehicles. So I do want to acknowledge that. I think there's more interest in funding grassroots organizations than there was when I got here back here 5 years ago. I think there's more interest in capacity building and more support that's going into capacity building, whether it's individual organizations or with some of the capacity building groups who help to organize this space for us. And I think we got to get into some of the nuances as well. There are local funders who are making changes and moving their strategies forward. And it might not have been related to the 12 recommendations. It could be related to the racial reckoning in 2020, which is huge. And I've seen that advancement happen. I also think that if we look though at the bigger picture where we have lots of work to do, dismantling structural racism requires some real honest truth conversations, less fear in the city, and an accountability amongst power brokers that we don't see, and we don't see that often enough. And groups that try to promote that vision, particularly the organizing groups and social justice groups, often punished when they try to move forward that agenda. At the same time, I've also seen funders who step forward with racial justice grants in the city who didn't do that before. And just one last thing on this that I would like to point out: we need to do more general support. We need to be more accessible. We need more transparent. I will say this though: the state of Michigan is a hot spot for power building and organizing work. And what's happening there? Money is being poured into the state around our civic processes here in Michigan, which create an opportunity for organizing groups to raise more money. Where's that money coming from? National foundations, donors. There's a huge Michigan Donor Alliance has done a great job of getting resources out to groups. So in that space, in that social change space, Michigan is actually seeing more resources come in to support this work. And I'm encouraged by that and encouraged by some of the work that some of our colleagues have to do. But the reality of it is we need philanthropic leadership who's willing to step forward publicly, make commitments, and then follow up on those commitments.
I have so many follow-up questions, but I want to open the floor. I mean, dang, Kevin. I want to open up the floor for Mark with respect to the 12 recommendations that came out way back in 2015. How are we shaping out today?
And I'll keep it brief because Kevin dropped all the bombs. I want to hear the follow-up questions. TPF came out of the 12 recommendations and the 2017 report that Kevin referenced because we felt that funders weren't listening. We said, we're just like a Detroiter, we're just going to do it ourselves, right? We're going to model the way that you can do equitable grant making while also shifting the culture, of philanthropy. And I think the time span, like I said, the report came out in 2015 and the racial reckoning in 2020 are related. The 2015 report was a deeply grassroots led effort, by Allied Media and Detroit People's Platform. And so for there be a 5-year gap of community members saying, hey, we want general operating support. We want multi-year support. We want to be at the table when these strategies are developed. And for funders, just being honest, kind of, crickets, not listening. And then for stuff to have to blow up 5 years later, 7 years later, we're still dealing with the same issues, in 2022. It says something. We should have been listening to community from the beginning, right? And we would be a heck of a lot further, if we done so. And so just really, piggybacking on the fact that, we're not where we were, but we could be a whole lot further by listening and centering community, in the issues.
I was struck by your answer to my very first question. The first words out of your mouth was, "I don't think we're doing really well." And you talked about the racial reckoning that happened in 2020 and all over the country. And I think, you know, for Detroit to be the largest majority Black city in the country, and for you to say that we didn't see the kind of collective organizing and the sort of, collective mandate to fund, racial reckoning work and all of the things in 2020 is blowing my mind. Actually, it really is. And when I look at the landscape of foundations and other funding organizations and even program officers, I'm seeing more folks that look like me in these positions. Why didn't that happen? I'm asking Kevin. I'm asking.
You asking me? Okay, you asking me. Well, Orlando, but think about it. The whole fight in 2020 was around racial justice, not equity, justice. That's what it was about. It was about power building and it was about organizing. And that's what it was about. We don't really talk about those things here in philanthropy. We're still kind of stuck on equity and trying to define what that is. And each institution is essentially defining it differently for themselves. And as a result, we never really got to the place where we're talking about power building as a strategy for change. And that gets to your grassroots work and the local level when you talk about that. Now, there are vehicles, again, Michigan Justice.
There's not, let me
they're doing something
here real quick, Kevin, and ask you if that is just an unwillingness to listen, because this conversation is happening. It's happening on the streets. It's happening in neighborhoods. It's happening at the community development organizational level. Why isn't this reaching the chambers of power in a way that it should? Well, is there, what's the disconnect?
But I'm gonna just say, I'll say this last thing and turn over to Mark. Is it not reaching them? Is it not reaching them? Or is it more that the interest in funding work that can be confrontational sometimes? Because I think there's also a misconception. Organizing is not always confrontational. Organizing can be about negotiation. It's about building community power to get things done. But I think there's this preconceived notion that organizing means there are going to be people marching in the boardrooms and they're going to be all over us, and there might be some of that. But the fear, if we really, when we say our missions of what we say we're going to do is not translating or adding up to what we say. And because there is some fear, but there's also, let's be honest, if you have power, why should you share that power? What would be the incentive to share that power? What's the true pushback on you to want to share power? To me, that's the big question.
I also want to name that for, far too long, organizations that have been shepherding capital into the community with executive leadership, trustee and board leadership, and even at the program and officer level leadership, have had no bridge to how that money is impacting neighborhoods, right? Intent versus impact. And when there is no accountability flow that way, these organizations that shepherd capital become culpable, and the disparate outcomes that we see time and time again. I want to ask this question to the both of you, especially when we're talking about movement work, when we're talking about power building and justice. One of the recommendations, and I love this, is to develop more nuanced ways of measuring success. First of all, let me just say this: the grant reports, all these data sets, inputs and outputs, if I could be Orlando X for a minute, our tenets of white supremacy, because some of the things that we are trying to measure is just it's hard to measure. And there is this disassociation from the qualitative data that so many of us are able to gather. Movement work, systems building work is messy. It's messy. It's messy. And it is so difficult for practitioners to package this messiness into a report to make the funder happy, to appease the funder. So let's talk about nuanced ways of measuring success. How do we get away from that and take what we got and figure out how to use it, refine it, leverage it, and keep doing the work? And it won't necessarily fit in comfortably into, you know, the spreadsheet of input, output, data set, you know, all of the things. Go ahead, Mark. And please put your questions in the chat. We're going to try to get to them after this. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, that nuanced ways of measuring success. So I organized briefly, I would say, for a 3-year period, you know, in the city, you know, doing economic justice, you know, power building around, you know, voting rights and things. Like, it's hard to, you know, when you think about, you know, what power means, is power is organized people and organized money, right? The organized people piece, like, how do you measure that? Like, the only way to really measure that, like, you can say, oh, we have, you know, 300 people that showed up to that rally. Like, what does that really mean? But if you say, you know, I developed X amount of relationships and we're moving on this, and this, you know, that means something to organizers, to people that are steeped in a community. Funders need to understand, if they're interested in power building, you have to learn the organization, the language of power and power building. And so, one, you have to be steeped and be in relationship with those that you're funding. Like, it can't just be, hey, you know, send me a report. You know, I give you a 2-year grant to change the world. Right. Send me a report every year and tell me how you changed the world. Right. Oh, and make sure that your budget is exactly like you said it was going to be, you know, when you apply for the grant. Right. That's unfair because things happen. Like, you can, you know, there's all types of stuff that pops up. But the piece that I think is in that number 4, that, you know, the 12 recommendations, is the relationships piece. How do we measure relationships? How do we talk about relationships? And how do we as funders be in relationship ourselves with the community and with the organizations that we're funding? That, you know, instead of a written report, I've seen more and more funders start doing phone calls, right? You know, like, we get on the phone with Kevin, you know, just, you know, quarterly, at least, right? You know, just to check in, and he knows our work because he's curious. He asks the right question. He gives us the opportunity to make mistakes, right? And to, you know, I feel comfortable talking to him about the mistakes, so that and this is what we're learning from it. Like, being in real relationship and not in a chastised, due diligence, like, hardcore, like, you got to hit these numbers or else I'm not going to fund you again. Toxic relationship, like, that makes a difference.
You know, Orlando, can I just speak to one quick thing? Because I agree with everything Mark said. And the other thing is, when you're organizing, like you said, it's messy. There's a lot of external factors that you don't have control over when you're trying to organize in a community. I actually prefer, because I prefer to have conversations with people, non-recorded conversations with people, so we can actually talk about some of the real things that are happening behind the scenes, and some of the things where they might be trying to confront halls of power. There are things that we need to do to talk about how that can happen and how we can actually support them with non-dollars, but political capital to try to do some of those things. And so I think sometimes there's things that you talk about on the phone that will not be included in a report that's going to go to the IRS, because these are the things that are going to help move the needle. And the last thing I'll say on this, one, when I worked at the New York Foundation, we just asked grantees, like, what was successful for you this past year? And one group told us, this was an immigrant organization in Brooklyn that was trying to address this challenge in their neighborhood. And they said the moment that our members met with our city council member and recognized they had power, that was our success. And that's what we talked about. When we share it with the board, what they talked about is their success. That's what we share with the board. It wasn't a campaign they won. It wasn't numbers. It was that simple act right there. And that is what power building is about. That's one of those components. And how do you do this work? It's just to talk to people, talk to them, listen to them, and then go back and tell the truth to your team. Some people do that. Some people have to find workarounds because of where they work. But I think that is a great way to go about evaluating success.
That's going to have to do it for this conversation. I am being nudged several times to transition, but that, and I know we're sort of leaving on a cliffhanger, but that should be an impetus and encouragement for everybody here to continue pushing and having the conversation. Kevin Ryan at Ford Foundation, Mark Greer at Transforming Power Fund. Thank you so much for joining us in this conversation. It was good, candid.
Wow, this was an essential conversation for Detroit and Southeast Michigan's nonprofit community. Next up is a lightning talk with Lisa Leverette, who was featured as one of our nonprofits and allies harnessing and activating power. Lisa Leverette is the Director and Chief Change Orchestrator at Community Connections Detroit. Lisa informs Orlando and forum guests about the meaningful work she does and the nonprofit funder power dynamic shifts made possible through participatory grant making. Let's listen in.
I'm Lisa Leverette. I'm the Chief Change Orchestrator with the Community Connections Grant Program. And just listening in this morning to all these big things and these big giants we got to slay. We've been eating this elephant one bite at a time for the last 16 years. We're what's called an intermediary, and we're a piece that sits between, it's a strange little piece that sits between traditional philanthropy and community. And our primary tool to help groups harness and exercise and take their power is participatory grant making, which is providing dollars to grassroots groups. And we've been doing this for 16 years in Detroit with grassroots groups, giving re-granting dollars from traditional philanthropy in addition to a suite of services. Let me tell you a little bit about our suite of services, and I'm going to tell you what it actually, what my goal is today is to let you know how this kind of looks, because we've had a lot of success with it and what it actually looked like tell you what it looks like in real time. So some of our suite of services are providing technical assistance to groups, and that includes us developing tools and applications to apply for our grants in a way that's relevant. So they're not RFPs. We have grant applications. They're not theses. They're not 30 pages long. We only collect information that we need and that we're going to use and that makes sense. And then we provide somebody to help folks to actually fill out the applications. We also do capacity building. And what our capacity building generally looks like is exposing folks to different concepts and tools to help them, first of all, understand the systemic nature of what we're enduring here, because there's this narrative that we're fighting against. And that narrative says that, Detroit folk, Black folks, we're bad. We look what we did to the city, and people internalize that. And so helping folks to understand that the forces that are out there are bigger than them and that they can learn from each other. And also, we have a community panel, people who actually live in the community that make decisions, and that's our bread and butter. These folks know the folks. They know the folks that have been laboring. They understand how things work, and they have the right touch. And we take our cues often from them. And we're building those relationships with those foundations, with those funders, with those older, whiter board members, to bring them along to understand about the power of the people and investing in the people and trusting the people. And we have a huge cohort of folks that we've been investing in for the last 16 years that have made substantial change, that have created alternate systems, and that are poised to be the next generation of nonprofits, allies, and they think differently and they work differently. We'll stop there.
Lisa said, I'm gonna stop there. And what she effectively did was she just dropped the mic. So I'm going to take MC privilege and say, hey, if you have a question, if you want to engage with Lisa, go ahead and raise your hand and we'll call on you to unmute. We got about 5 minutes for this back and forth. So try to keep it brief because we want to try to get as much in as possible. So I know this group ain't shy. And if I don't see your hand, go ahead and unmute. because I may not see it because there's a lot of us on here.
I would like to say, my name is Andrea Thompson with Ladies Entrepreneur Empowerment Circle. Lisa is amazing. Thank you, Lisa, for sharing. She's been doing this work, like she said, 16 years. I've sat on her panel. I've been a grantee. She's changed so many lives in the school where I used to work, Osborne. She helped transform that community and change a lot of those young people's lives who are now graduating with their bachelor's and master's degrees. I learned so much from her. She just don't talk the talk. She walk the walk. She really has built so many leaders under her leadership. So I just wanted to lift her up and say, thank you, Lisa. Continue to do what you're doing.
That's our girl. Hey, Andrea, thank you for that. I see Heidi's hand up. Go ahead, Heidi, unmute.
Hey, Lisa.
Hey, Heidi.
Hey, everyone. Heidi from Hudson Weber. Lisa, we are like so behind on connecting, but anyway.
I know, right?
We've been trying back and forth. Anyway, one of the things that I learned from Lisa when we were able to get a grant last year to them for the COVID response work, what she taught me was that I had to push back on our foundation around was like what we would normally consider like overhead costs, because Community Connections does all this great, like really hands-on TA with all the groups that they work for, that it's more expensive. So like the overhead is more expensive because there's more capacity building for the organizations that they grant to. And so it's a nice opportunity for us to like push back on our sort of normal, like what we think overhead should be, like what that sort of operating overhead should be. And it was a great conversation. But I just wanted to ask you, like, because as a foundation, sometimes that kind of reflects the struggle that I have, I think personally, in trying to like get deeper into community. Is like, it is kind of a staff capacity issue on our end too. Like our overhead in some ways doesn't pay for us always to do that deep in the streets work that I'd really like to do. And so I just wanted to kind of curious, like if you have any response to that, or how that's just the way you do your work. That's how you built it. And then it's sort of a struggle. I think the way the foundations are sometimes built is like, they're not built to support that kind of engagement.
Yeah.
That's a great question, Heidi. And I know you're familiar from your previous background in evaluation about being in the street and touching the people and knowing how important that is. So yes, traditional foundations don't do that, but they can. So I think it's important to kind of, when we talk about dismantling structural racism. And part of that, a big part of that is dismantling structures, right? If you take it and break it down. So dismantling the structures means that you got to do some radical stuff. When you destroy something and dismantle it, that means you tear it up, which means you have to do things differently. And you might not know the right things to do, but I think it's important for traditional funders, and we provide opportunities for that, through what we do. Like if you want to come to and see one of our panel reviews, right? As a funder, we do offer that, and then some of the other things we do. But from internally, you all got the money, do it, bring in more people, right? Figure out how to do it differently. If we're truly going to make this thing work, traditional philanthropy can't look like traditional philanthropy looks now, right? It's gonna have to move. Like, we're an intermediary. Think of us as an intermediary. Because we look differently than we looked 16 years ago, right? And we just have to keep pushing ourselves. It's harder. It's more expensive, right? Because even though we invest in people, we're still like right at the edges. Like, we don't have any extras, right? But when we see something that has to change, we change it. We have to change it. Because if not, we're being dishonest and we're being insincere about the change that we want to see. So you got the money, you're smart, you know what it feels like. Push the needle, Heidi. Make it happen within your foundation, modeling for other traditional foundations.
Virtual round of applause to Lisa Leverette and her. As always, we appreciate your candor, we appreciate your commitment, and we appreciate you being here and giving an amazing offering to the practitioners, the of all sectors here on this platform. That radical truth. Thank you, Lisa.
Hey, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for your time.
Yes, thank you for your transparency, Lisa. What a deeply heartfelt and powerful conversation. This segues perfectly into our next conversation on shifting funder nonprofit power dynamics. This is a discussion between Amber Hamilton, Executive Director of Memphis Music Initiative, and Meg Massey and Ben Robo, co-authors of Letting Go: How Philanthropists and Impact Investors Can Do More Good by Giving Up Control. The conversation picks up where Lisa Leverette left off.
It bleeds so nicely into what we want to talk about when we are endeavoring to shift power dynamics between nonprofits and funders. Amber, go ahead, continue. We'll start with you.
So what you just witnessed was the testimony of doing things differently. And I want to, if you walk away with nothing else today, I want every single person to walk away empowered and knowing that philanthropy can be different, and it can stop causing harm, and it can really be helpful, and it can reimagine itself into something that it should have been generations ago. You have the power to do that. One of the things I emphasize when I talk to groups, and I'm in Memphis, so we're regional, so we're not a national organization, but let me be clear. The philanthropy police aren't going to come and get you if you decide to eliminate overhead from your grants. The philanthropy police aren't going to come and get you if you decide to give more money to Black and brown folk or BIPOC folk. Like, all of this is possible. We certainly do it in our organization, and the philanthropy police ain't come and got me yet. And trust me, I would be first on their list. So I want you to know all of these structures that we've gotten used to, all of this thing is completely made up, y'all. Completely made up. So if you go inside that organization tomorrow and you sit in front of the person who should have been here today, who didn't make the time to, for this forum, and you look them in the eye, say, we can start doing things differently today. And if they need data, there's data out there. If they need stories, there's stories out there. If they need exemplars, Lisa is a wonderful one in your own community. I just want to emphasize to you that you can do things differently. And I want to also really address the question really quickly about the confidence to approach, that old white kind of funder board and all of those things. I'm going to talk about it a little bit later. But I always say, go home but never go alone. If that ain't you got to build your set. You got to bring the homies with you. You really need to bring some allies into conversations and do the pre-work before you walk into that room, so you know that you have everything lined up. But also, I'm going to tell you one thing I tell myself every single day. I'm not better than anybody, but nobody's better than me. Like, for real, y'all. I'm not better than anybody, but nobody's better than me. Nobody has a magic formula to make this stuff work over you. You got to continue to listen and continue to grow, but nobody's better than you. So I'm gonna leave that. Again, at least I hit y'all with the newness. So I'm gonna let y'all marinate in that.
Yes, I'm with the newness.
Yes, and turn it over to Ben and Meg.
Yeah, go ahead, Meg.
I feel like that's a very tough act to follow, but thank you so much for letting us be part of this conversation. Ben and I wanted to write Letting Go because we found ourselves in way too many rooms where we were seeing mostly white, mostly male, mostly American and European men making decisions about communities that they weren't part of. And you can be as well-intentioned as you want to be, but if you're not part of that community, you really need to rethink why you want to impose yourself on them. And I think once we saw that dynamic in philanthropy, we started exploring it. And this was a few months before the pandemic, when, to your point, Amber, we were suddenly seeing in interviews people saying, oh, we've never done it like this. We can't do it like this. number one, we discovered there's a whole history of groups across the U.S. and around the world doing it differently. So there's plenty of precedent for doing it differently, but also as soon as there was a pandemic, suddenly people were really willing to let go of preconceived notions and do things differently. So yeah, it is all fake. There is no philanthropy police. And what we tried to do with the book was lift up these stories of how we can make, how can we accelerate this change? How can we get things back to a stasis and return power to communities who should have always had a leadership role in determining how funds in their community are spent? That I'll let you chime in.
Thanks so much for having us, and I love the chat. It's how engaging this chat is. It's a real conversation. Yeah, I mean, just to put out a quick definition, I know we'll get into it, but the book Let It Go is about participatory grant making, which is a term that 5-10 years ago was sort of on the fringes of philanthropy. It was definitely something that was done a lot of time on the local community level, but not really known in the council on foundations or some of these larger philanthropy groups. But in the past few years has really taken a step up. And in a nutshell, what it means is when a foundation decides to change the how of how they give, it's less about the what they give to, it's more about the how of how they make decisions. And they say, right now we have a top-down model where people who are hired by the foundation are using their best judgment to decide what our community needs, however we define our community. Participatory grant making is the decision to say, okay, we're going to cede decision-making power to the communities that we are trying to serve. And there's a lot of nuance there. Who is the community? Where do these roles, where does decision-making power happen? In a nutshell, it happens when you're first setting out your theory of change as a foundation. It happens when you're opening up your applications and deciding who gets to apply. It happens when you're doing due diligence and deciding who gets your money. And at each of these stages, again, we can get into the details, but at each of these stages, there is an opportunity and there are best practices for how to say, I'm going to maybe create a community advisory board that has real decision-making power with teeth to decide where my money goes. Or so either 50% of the decision makers will be community members or 100% of the decision makers will be community members. And this has now been done. Meg and I, in our book, we said we counted 40 people, 40 different foundations that were doing this. I was having a conversation yesterday with another consultant in the space, and she says that now she counts 200 foundations doing this. And that's just the past 2 years. So yeah, that's the definition, and we're really looking forward to getting into some of the details.
All right. I want to ground us in place. So for those of us who are in Detroit, Hamtramck, Highland Park, and I saw some folks in here from Ann Arbor, all over, southeastern Michigan. Let's go to Memphis and see how Amber is, all about that news. So we're going to show a clip, and we are going to come back after y'all see this clip.
But just real quick, this is a video that we shot to launch a call and response initiative, which I'll talk to you about. But in this mini clip, I imagine what it would be like if Harriet Tubman had to go through the phases we put people through and the things that we put people through to get money to support her work. So,
can you imagine if our ancestors, okay, maybe not your ancestors, but can you imagine the ancestors like Harriet Tubman trying to fund and support work that she was doing inside of these broken systems?
Hi, I'm Harriet Tubman. I work day and night to get my people free. I was told that you may have some money or some support here to help me support my work.
Oh, that's just great, Harriet. Do you have a 501c3?
A what?
What about a fiscal sponsor? 5-year track record of success? And how good are you at report writing? What about...
Wait, maybe you didn't hear me. I'm Harriet Tubman. And I set people free. I need support and I need it now. Yeah, they can go get a lick their finger and find me something.
Okay. Did you attend our pre-application workshop on Zoom last Thursday?
How I didn't come to no damn application process Thursday because I was being chased by 5 damn dogs in the woods. So no, I didn't come to it. I didn't come to it.
Well, Harriet, it doesn't seem like you are an ideal fit for this
It doesn't
application.
seem like you are ideal fit for this job. I set people free. Kind of like what you doing here. You here because of me.
What about a 5-year track record of success? How are you at report writing?
Who is you looking at? Lady, I'm right here. I got 400 people outside wait.
We will add
400 people outside wait.
to
400 black people outside wait. I said 400 times black people outside wait. Can you help me or can't you help me?
well, we will get you.
That's a yes or no question. Please, ma'am. I got things to do.
Yes, we will.
Are you feeling? Your feelings hurt? Huh? Look at me. Your feelings hurt? Are your look at me? Take your glasses off.
In the water.
Look at me.
Anyway.
And sin. So, obviously, set people free. We set people free. It was just, it's another way to tell our story, right? Because the story of Memphis Music Initiative, real quick, I'll go through who we are, but that's really not, you don't need to know all the particulars. We are a Memphis-based direct service provider and funder in the same organization, right? And so the video that we shot was me just being like, you know what? We need a different way to tell this story. We need to use our creative genius, just like we try to get young people to use their creative genius to kind of solve problems. We need to use our creativity to solve problems. I wrote that video, as well as there's more coming, folks. We just shot a couple more week before last. So there's more coming. And yes, obviously it's a kind of a parody, but that's what we do. We got people out here doing the work, and we put all kinds of constraints and processes and things that don't fit around them for our needs, right? We're never thinking about their needs. We're thinking about our needs, like the report I need to write for the trustee, the thing. None of that matters. The work matters. And we got people out here that don't have a 501c3, don't have a fiscal sponsor, don't have an annual report, don't have a strategic plan. But you know what they out there doing? Taking care of our babies. You know what they out there doing? Putting in that good work and being disruptive. So it is on us, people in the philanthropy space. It is on us. It is our obligation. It is our responsibility to move all of that bullshit out the way. Excuse me, I said I wasn't on cuss, but sometimes I can't help myself. I'm still on my block, y'all. To move all of that out the way and get to cutting the check to the people doing work. That's the bottom line, y'all. That's what we in here to do. If we're on the philanthropy side, we measure what we do in dollars out the door, in strategies, in impact, right? So why must we continue to deal with these boxes? And I know it goes back to a very important question I was asked in the chat, but the people who set up those structures and hold us accountable to them are not the people who are hearing this message. Y'all, do whatever you need to do. Y'all are freedom fighters. Y'all are fighting to get people free. Do whatever you need to do. Stand in front of whoever you need to stand in front of to do it. You want to call me, have me speak to your board? I'll speak to them for a reasonable fee. So we really have to find our motivation in breaking down these systems that don't work. And I will put in the chat a link to our disruptive philanthropy paper, which is a white paper kind of talking about these concepts. I'll put the video link in the chat. Any tools that we have, we are more than welcome to share with you. Let me also just plug Ben and Meg's book. Great resource for you to power up and get your kind of case together. But y'all, we need to stand in front of these gatekeepers and tell them no mas. We're not doing this no more. We cannot continue to harm the people doing the work with our own issues and our own baggage. So I'll stop there.
We over-intellectualize some of this to death. And there are people who are actually doing just doing the work. And so that's part of the reason why I asked the question, number one, about narrative visualization, but also this application process. If I've been doing this work 15 years and you know I've been doing this work, don't ask me to apply for money.
And at the time, they know they want to give you the money. So why are you
already
to do this?
Why are we doing this?
When in doubt, cut the check.
And it's like the process needs to have a purpose to it, right? Like, again, like not asking you to jump through hoops because that's the way it's always been done, or like it has to look like they're doing something. Like that's I won't pass. That's some nonsense that needs to be done away with. And I always give the example when they sort of look at me funny, like, what's wrong with the town? Like, what's wrong with the survey? And I'm like, when Comcast sends you a customer service survey, do you fill it out? Or you probably don't, because you're like, Comcast doesn't care. Sorry, didn't mean to turn this into a form on how much I hate Comcast, but like, it's the same point. When people ask your opinion, if you know that they're not really going to take it seriously, you're not going to take it seriously either. And that's where the trust building comes in. And the foundation needs to say, we want you to tell us how to, we want you to decide how to spend this money. And here's how we're backing that up. We want you to have the majority of seats on our grant making committee. We are offering you, training to read grant applications, putting something concrete and putting some teeth behind it so that it's not a waste of people's time. It's a constructive exercise that can bring all the different expertise that people bring to the table and make things better instead of just going through the same hamster wheel over and over again.
So y'all, I want to give y'all a little preview into one of the videos that has need to come out. So I'm giving y'all breaking news, inside behind the scenes, right? So one of the videos that's going to come out, we have people kind of anonymously tell their story about how they feel about the process, and they use puppets, like they make kids do to express their feelings. And some of the puppets are still like, oh no, this is great. Because on the nonprofit side, we get trained very early. Shut up, do what they tell you to do. And if they ask you about their process, say it's great. Because you owe the money. You're not going to get honest answers out of them. You hold the power in that relationship. Because, you can ask some of the questions and ask people to be real with you, but you've got a lot of trust building to do before you can get to that point. Yeah. I just want to talk about some very quick things from my side that I think is really important. Number one, as we're thinking about how to dismantle and unpack and decolonize these processes, number one, don't center whiteness in it. Don't start with how the white people on your board are going to be offended or not like it or blah, 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 blah. If you start from that standpoint, you will never get out of it. Start from, we're in a service industry. What do the people need, and how can we eliminate the most barriers between them and what they need? All the stuff in the middle, anything that can get thrown out, throw it out. Okay. It's not about us as philanthropists. A lot of people take these jobs because they think they're really smart about community problems, and they just give some of these people their smartness, then this problem will be solved. Nessa, please, girl, don't do it. It's not that. So rid yourself of that notion and humble yourself, which is a great point made in Ben and Meg's book. Humble yourself to the people in the process. I also talked about relationships are the new grant agreement. Let me say that again. Relationships are the new grant agreement. Really be in relationship with these people that you are funding and putting all these pieces on to figure out what they need. You need to be in relationship with them, not a burdensome relationship where you calling them every week talking about, hey, what you doing now? What you doing now? What you doing now? But you need to be in relationship with them so that they will trust you and understand where you're coming from. And I would say that impatience and comfort zones are the enemy of impact. Okay, impatience and comfort zones are the enemy of impact. This is going to take time to do. I wish I could make this happen tomorrow, but you're going to have to chip away at some of your organizations. Some of y'all have what I call the apex trustee. It's kind of like an apex predator, or worse, because it's that one board member or one trustee who has to have all the paper and all the processes, all the things to make them feel comfortable. So we are literally building an entire system and structure and untold hours of work on the part of the nonprofit and the program officer to satisfy the apex trustee. Okay, what if we took that person out? And I don't mean kill them. I mean, what if we found a way to get to that person and shifted that? Could we eliminate all the hours of work that happen, because of that person trying to satisfy them? So let's think about the key people we need to influence and get to, who are really the cause of all of this work that kind of tunnels hell to get to a better process. The last little tip I will give you, because I forgot to mention it in some of my solutions, is look at the pipeline of people coming to your organization to work there.
Mm.
If you are the only Black person there in a city like Detroit, that's a problem. The only Black and brown people you see are the receptionists and the people welcoming you in the door. That's a problem. So you have to both, on the staffing side, take a very hard look at what that looks like, but also, even as far as internships, who do y'all bring in to be your interns? Are you just going to the local college and getting that, fourth year senior who has the money to be there? One of the things we did with our intern process was flip on that and say, listen, we want the single mom. We want the person that might have a record in the juvenile justice system. We want the people who we're trying to impact. We want to welcome them into our organization through this internship program. And people were like, can you really do that? I mean, it's an intern. Really ain't running an organization. It's an internship. They're going to learn some things and sit in some meetings. So on every level of the organization, you need to be unpacking, are we doing this in a way that invites in community and makes them one of us? Because most of us are sitting in our air-conditioned office with paid time off and healthcare and all the things, and then sitting in a role to judge other people and how they work with a quarter of those things. Y'all, we got to flip that. We got to flip that.
Now that was another incredible conversation, and we're not finished yet. Next up is another lightning talk with the outspoken and humorous Vu Le. Vu Le is the former executive director of RVC, a nonprofit in Seattle that promotes social justice by supporting leaders of color, strengthening organizations led by communities of color, and fostering collaboration among diverse communities. He is also a speaker and writer of the popular blog nonprofitaf.com. Let's join Orlando and Vu Le as they continue the conversations on how nonprofits and allies can harness and activate their power.
We're going to keep it moving. I'm excited because I don't know how many of you actually read Nonprofit AF, but it's something that I go to at least twice a week. Vu Le is here. Vu Le needs no introduction, but you're going to get to know Vu Le during this lightning talk. And we are, holding this tension or this theme of nonprofits and allies, harnessing and activating their power. Examples of narrative building, funding our own liberation, intermediaries, shifting power. And so without further ado, our second lightning talk of the day, Vu Le.
Thank you, Orlando. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I use he, him pronouns, and I am calling in from Seattle, which is on Duwamish and Coast Salish land. And for colleagues who are blind or have low vision, it's helpful to describe what we look like. So think of an Asian Beyonce, I guess. I don't know. Okay, mid-age Asian man with short hair and glasses. I am glad to be here today with you all. And honestly, this has been a really challenging keynote because it is short, right? And I'm so used to showing up and just flashing pictures of baby animals and saying something funny and people feel good. But the reality is that it has been really hard. And I know it's been really hard for you all. And during these times, I think about what I'm grateful for. And one of the things I'm grateful for is for our sector. I love our sector. Our sector has been amazing. It has been so hard, and yet we continue. It has been relentless, and yet we continue. It has been heartbreaking, and yet we continue. In some of the darkest and some of the longest nights, our sector has been a beacon of light and hope for so many in the community. And I know it's been just challenging the past couple of years, and yet we still do. We still lift up families. We still build communities. We still work on laws. We still run programs, even while so many of us are dealing with a whole bunch of things, like dealing with our own challenges with caregiving or our own mental health. It has been really hard, and I'm just grateful for you all, for everyone in the sector. I love our sector. I know it seems some people don't believe me when I say that, right? People are like, "Well, you're always constantly criticizing our sector." What? Why? Well, I criticize our sector because I love our sector, and I think that we have so much potential, and we do so much all the time. I love our sector, and yet I am equally frustrated with our sector. Right? We are just full of brilliant people who are continually mired by self-doubt, by martyrdom, by toxic intellectualizing. We've been really nice, right? We are a sector of very, very nice people all the time. We build bridges. We are bridges. And I think for a long time, we just accept this adage that if you are a bridge, you get walked on. And we're just like, you know what? That is our role. We are bridges. We're going to get walked on. We're just going to be okay with it because we're making the world better by being bridges. And I don't think this is enough anymore, right? I think we've been putting out with all sorts of ridiculousness all the time because we've been so nice. We haven't been owning our power, and we've allowed terrible things to happen. We've been distracted. We are still fighting some of the same ridiculous battles that don't make any sense for us to be fighting anymore. We still have people arguing with us about overhead rates. We still have funders who are just like, what is your overhead rate? We've been funding Sudoku and thinking that it is okay. Right? We don't have time for that anymore. I feel like everything is on fire, and many of us are like firefighters putting out the fires, just rushing, putting out the fires of injustice. And every 3 or 4 steps, a funder is still like, I want to make sure that the money I'm giving you is being spent on the water and not the hose. Like, I don't want my money to be spent on the hose. What is your hose to water ratio? And for a long time, we're just like, oh, no, don't worry. We got someone else to pay for the water. You're only paying for the hose. Our hose to water ratio is less than 10%. Don't worry about it. We were very careful about only spending most of our money on the water. It's terrible. It's time for us to own our power and do things differently. We got to throw out the old rule books. They're not working. The old playbook sucks. Okay, they have been, in some ways, not only are they awful, but we've been complacent because we think that by adhering to the playbook, that somehow we're making a difference. We don't have time to waste translating grant answers from one proposal to another. We don't have time with ridiculous things like Robert's rules. Who is Robert? Why are we still using his rules? We don't have time trying to justify ourselves. We don't have time to try to make people like be okay, and not get angry at us. We need a new playbook. And here's some things we need to do. We need to have the audacity of ambition. I am tired of us thinking small and incremental. We've been trained for a long time to think, you know what, if we're serving 100 people this year, maybe next year we serve 10% more. We serve 110 people. When the reality is, I want us to think about what is the systemic injustice we're dealing with. How do we make sure that we don't have anyone to serve at all because the systems are fair and equitable? Right? And I think about how small we've been trained to think. Do you know Juicero? Juicero was a Wi-Fi connected juicing machine. Think about this, a Wi-Fi connected juicing machine. And you buy these proprietary packets of fruit and vegetables that are already pre-cut up for $7 a package. And you put it into this Wi-Fi connected juicing machine, and it squeezes out 1 glass of juice per $7 packet. Bloomberg did an investigation where they discovered that you just squeeze the packets by hand, you get the same amount of juice, but faster. So they wrote about this. And Juicero tanked. But you know what? Before it tanked, it was boasting that it had $130 million in venture capital. It had 50 full-time engineers designing this Wi-Fi connected juicing machine. Meanwhile, some of us are like, can we please have $19 to end poverty and racism? Like, this is what we're doing. And then the funder's like, yes, you can have $4 of the $19 that you asked for, but you can only spend on paper clips on Tuesdays. And we think that's okay for some reason. How is that okay? I think about Jan Maselka and what she said a while ago, which is that we've become so professionalized in our sector that we've lost one of our most important skills, which is to organize. We can write a proposal, a long ass, boring ass, useless proposal that's 50 pages long or whatever. And we've lost the ability to get 100 people onto the street or to pack the city hall regarding a policy. We've lost that ability because we've been wasting our time on logic models and theories of change and things like that, and grant proposals. We got to blow some shit up, y'all. And we're going to take care of ourselves because we have a lot of work to do. But if we wanted an easy life, we would not have chosen this path. We came here to fight. We came to this sector to fight. And the sector has told us, you know what? This is how you fight. You fight by conforming to all these shitty systems that we've established for you that we think is working. We need to stop that. The arc of the moral universe, I don't feel has been bending. I feel like it's been reversing. I know that sounds hopeless. I'm not losing hope because I work with you all and I meet some of the most brilliant people in this sector, right? We can bend the arc back. We can bend it. It is us who bend the arc of justice. We got to go out there. We got to kick some tables over. All right. I remember the quote by Bertrand Russell. He says, the whole problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are always so certain of themselves, but wiser people are so full of doubts. This is us. We are the wiser people who are trying to make the world better, and we are always full of doubt. While the people who are so focused on injustice and inequity and advancing it, they are so full of certainty and they go and they move forward with 100% certainty. While we are over here constantly doubting ourselves. We don't have time to doubt ourselves. We don't have time to underestimate ourselves. We do not have time to not fully own our power. Our communities depend on us. We're at endgame here. And we have to kick some tables over and piss some people off. Just get it done.
Thank you, Vule. Let's give it up for Vule in the chat. I want to call out somebody who's been making a ruckus in the chat all day and somebody who knows this work and this critique really well. Don Jones. Don Jones, I would love to hear from you right now. Don, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Go for it.
Wow. Just lot of great stuff here. You said what I just put in the chat here. What's on my mind at the moment is consolidating the ideas. These loud voices that are so necessary, but philanthropy boards seem to be very good at ignoring them and waiting it out. So I'm sort of curious as to your and the other reaction as to how to be effective at getting those loud voices there and then staying with it. It's easy to just we tried 2 or 3 times. Nobody heard us. I guess we're just going to have to go do something else. That's one thought. And I think Orlando C. and I put this 3 or 4 times in the checks. It's a force I rely on, which is remembering that philanthropy, money's put into philanthropy. They get a tax break for it. Therefore, it's actually our money or partially our money. And I think that there should be more force, that there should be a public involvement in the boards of all philanthropy, both community foundations as well as philanthropy, because they exist because we allow them to exist. So those are 2 kind of thoughts that I have, but I'm interested about maybe the first one about how to make those loud, effective voices that we've heard from today and how to keep that going in order to bring about the change that we're talking about here.
Yeah. Can we bring Vule back in the spotlight and allow him to respond to Don Jones?
Yeah. Thank you, Don. This is what I think that many of our strategies maybe in the past have not been working because, again, we've been very nice. And right now, what we need to do is start working on different strategies, including legislation. Right now, for example, the ACE Act, right? Philanthropy has been hoarding all this money and always telling us like there's only so much money to go around. That is bullshit. There's over $1 trillion just sitting in endowments and donor advised funds right now. Right? We're like, philanthropy is saving this money. And many of us have been saying, hey, look, you need to actually give out more money. What are you saving for? Are you saving for the future? There won't be a future for anyone except wealthy white men at this point. And for years, we've been saying that. And now people are getting tired. So now there's more legislation coming along, the ACE Act. And of course, philanthropy has been fighting it tooth and nail, right? But we have to organize just as well. We need to be way more organized. We got to be a lot more vocal. We put up with stuff. I was talking to an ED who told me that in her city every year around Christmas time, like someone the local newspaper runs a list of the top 10 organizations with the worst overhead rates. And she's like, I'm afraid that we're going to end up on this list. I was like, why are you afraid of ending up on this list? You need to just get a whole bunch of people together, write a counter op-ed saying that this is complete bullshit here and that it's harming our work. Right? Over here in Seattle, 240 organizations, leaders of color, EDs of color, got together and sent a letter to all the funders in the state saying, our Black and brown communities are dying at greater rates. You need to double the amount of money that you're giving out. It needs to be over 5 years. It needs to be general operating funds. It needs to be whatever the hell we want to focus on, including advocacy. And they forced them to sign a pledge saying they're going to do this. And yeah, a dozen or so funders actually did sign the pledge saying that they would double their amount of money that they're giving out. So I have started calling people out by name and hashtagging crappy funding practices. And this has honestly been more effective than anything like the nice things that we've been doing. In the past, I would be like, hey, I noticed that you did this, and would you think about changing this? And the funders are like, oh, thank you so much for your feedback. We really appreciate feedback. We will consider it for the next 80 years and then do nothing about it. Like, that's what's been happening, right? But now I'm just like, hey, X, Y, and Z Foundation, this is shitty funding practices, and you're wasting our time, and you're causing people to die because you're wasting our time. Like, I want us to channel that sort of righteous anger here that we are feeling right now. Get together, write op-eds, like protests, you do whatever and start working on legislation.
Boulay, really quickly while we still have you, and I think that this is a palpable fear, apprehension that really exists within the city of Detroit, and that is around punishment. And I think it is what Elena is trying to get to with her question. In the chat, when you have a power structure that is punitive to folks who exist to be to provide a counter to the racist and disparate practices that continue to proliferate, the punishment happens, the elimination and the further marginalization, the stripping of resources happen. So talk a little bit about organizing so that how can we as practitioners hold a net and strategize around, like, if this particular week Sarita Scott gonna be the loud one and she gonna risk it all, then we gotta figure out like how to have that net for her, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, say more about that.
Thank you, Orlando. Yes, we do need to organize. We do have more safety in numbers. 240 organizations writing a letter, they can't punish 240 organizations. It would look terrible. So that's one thing we need to do, right? But I think the more important thing that we need to acknowledge is that those of us who have more privilege need to be out there taking some of the punishment, because people have been punished and it has not been equitable. Yes. Women of color have been punished significantly over decades for saying these things. And so those of us, men, for example, white folks, we need to be the ones on the front line, and we got to be okay with taking some of the punishment once in a while.
Yeah.
Because women of color have been taking the brunt of it for a long ass time. So let's give them a break if we can and be out there in the forefront.
You know what? I love that you said that. And, I just want to name, for you, in case you didn't know that, a lot of us on this call, and I'm going to be very candid, are not the average Detroiter making $27,000 a year in a household of 2 or 3, right? That is the average Detroiter making almost $28,000 in a household with more than just themselves. And so we do operate, and I got to name this, we do operate in a space of privilege, in a space where we can at least have the audience of power challenge them, take the punishment, what have you. My admonishment for us is to remember that, especially in the city of Detroit, there are folks who are living in way worse conditions, right? There are folks who are living in active punishment every single day. And we're scared of somebody saying the wrong thing to us, or, you know what I mean? It's like, we have to remember to operate in that space. And that only happens when we continue to have ties to the streets. It only happens when we continue to provide, not always represent those who we feel are represented, but create spaces where folks can represent themselves, right?
And just like that, this was a snapshot of several of the gems dropped and wisdom shared during the 2022 Detroit Capacity Building Forum. This virtual event was a collaboration between Michigan Community Resources and COAC Detroit. Thank you to our forum host, Orlando Bailey, all of the featured guest speakers, the staff behind the scenes who made this program possible, as well as the participants who kept the conversations going. Links to all guests, organizations, and helpful resources can be found in the description below.